We often think of ancient Rome and ancient Athens as being at the top of the pile when it comes to standards of living in Europe centuries ago. That's not without good reason. Both cities were incredibly advanced for their time and were responsible for countless inventions and innovations. Focusing on the Roman and Greek capitals is doing the rest of Europe a disservice, though. There were many incredible ancient cities in Europe, the remains of which can still be seen today. We're going to go on a tour of them in this video. Almost everybody watching this video will have heard of Pompeii. We learn about it in history. It's the city in Italy that was buried by a volcano, petrifying citizens into rock. The people are still there today, frozen in time by their coating of ash and lava. Before Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried the town below it, the Romans had no word for volcano. This was a horrible way to find out about them. Before its untimely burial, Pompeii was a wealthy city which flourished not far from where Naples can be found today. The people of Pompeii were art collectors and dealers. Many works of art were uncovered in the rubble when the lost city was excavated. Since 1960, it's been forbidden to perform excavation work at the site. Historians are now more concerned about preserving what's there than finding anything more. More than 2.5 million people visit Pompeii every year. It's a somewhat grisly time capsule. London in England is one of the world's major cities, and the capital of its country. It's been a center of power for centuries, but before it became London, it was known to the ancient Romans as Londinium. The ancient Britons built the settlement somewhere around 2,000 years ago, including a bridge across the River Thames, which made it a port. Compared to the vast, sprawling city of today, Londinium was tiny. It covered barely half a square mile. The Romans settled in Londinium after the defeat of Boudica and set about the work of expanding it. By the year 100, it had expanded to become home to 50,000 people. A major fire damaged much of the Roman infrastructure during the 2nd century, and it slowly shrank until it was largely abandoned 1,500 years ago. Needless to say, the area has recovered since then. All that remains of the old town is the London Wall, segments of which can still be seen dotted around the modern city. London isn't the only major European city which is built on the ashes of an older settlement. If you dig far enough below the surface of Milan in Italy, you'll find the remnants of Mediolanum. It initially belonged to the Insubers, a Celtic people who founded it over 2,500 years ago. They held on to it for over 3 centuries, but were eventually conquered by the Romans, just like almost everybody else in Europe was back in those days. Under Roman leadership, just as we saw with Londinium, the old town prospered, eventually going on to become the capital city of the Western Roman Empire. In the year 313, Emperor Constantine was in Mediolanum when he issued what is now known as the Edict of Milan, which decreed that all religious expression within the Roman Empire would be tolerated and treated equally. That proclamation saw medieval Milan become a safe haven for early Western Christians, and from there, the modern city grew. Seemingly everywhere you look in Europe, you'll find an ancient city founded or enhanced by the Romans. Here's one in Spain, Bilbais, which is also sometimes known as Augusta Bilbais. If you're familiar with Spanish geography, it isn't far from Calatayud. As a claim to fame, the classic Roman poet Martial was born here in the year 40. Coins found in the area confirm that prior to Roman occupation, Bilbais belonged to the Lusones tribe, who were Celtic and lived on the land approximately 2,200 years ago. 300 years after that, the coins, pottery, and architectural style of the land changed to a distinctly Roman fashion. Although the ongoing presence of Celtic artifacts suggests that the two cultures may have lived side by side for a while, it's known that Augustus bestowed Roman citizenship on all inhabitants of the town shortly after the death of Caesar, so it may be that the Celts joined up voluntarily. The sulfur springs that Martial wrote about in his poetry are still here and are now used as spas. Going back to the trend of modern cities being built on top of ancient ones, what is now Marseille in France was once better known as Massilia. Founded by the Ionian Greeks 2,600 years ago, Massilia was once one of Europe's greatest cities, dominating the region and coming out victorious in 2 battles with Carthage over the course of 2 centuries. The landscape of the area makes it a natural position to build a city with military might. It's built on 3 hills, and it has a natural harbor. That makes it easy to defend, and an instant focal point for trade via the sea. Around 100 years after its founding, Phocia fell, and Massilia expanded rapidly. It even survived the Greek Wars. Because of its location, citizens of Massilia were never recalled to Greece to participate, so they stayed and cultivated the land. While their contemporaries were fighting and dying, they were building temples, a theater, and formal docks. The end of their independence came when they made the poor choice of supporting Pompey against Julius Caesar. Caesar won, came back to Massilia, and beat it into surrender. From that point on, it was part of the Roman Republic. Staying within the Roman Empire, because it's hard not to when you're dealing with ancient Europe, you can still see pieces of old Aquincum when you go to Hungary. It's largely been swallowed by modern Budapest, but the ruins of some of the ancient structures are still there. During the time of the Roman Empire, it would have been situated right on the northeastern border of the area known as Pannonia. Legend has it that Marcus Aurelius, another ancient Roman writer, wrote the bulk of his classic book, Meditations, while he was living in Aquincum. As is the case with acquired Roman towns and cities, Aquincum was originally settled by Celtic tribes. By the year 50, it was a Roman military stronghold, populated by a legion of almost 6,000 soldiers. A town grew around the barracks, and 50 years later it became the capital of Pannonia Inferior. To suit its status, many cutting-edge Roman innovations were built here, including homes which had central heating, large public baths, and the 2 giant amphitheaters which can still be seen today. Perhaps more impressively, there was also a 3-level aqueduct around the city once, although this has now all but crumbled into dust. Archaeologists digging up what they thought was an ancient vineyard in Tak, Hungary, got a little bit of a shock during the 1950s. They found the vineyard easily, but they hadn't prepared themselves for what was around it. An entire ancient Roman city, which we now know was called Gorsium. The first thing that turned up under the vineyard was believed to be a Christian basilica, but it had been misidentified. In actuality, it was a villa, and a palatial one at that. They kept digging and found low city walls surrounding shops, private homes, and even a graveyard, all of which had lain undisturbed for several centuries. It takes a little imagination to picture what most of the buildings may have looked like based on what's left of the stonework, but the classic columns are much easier to identify as Roman in design. A few bronze statues left in the earth tell us that the people who lived here were probably wealthy. All these years later, excavations at Gorsium are still ongoing, and so the entire area has been turned into a huge archaeological park. Visitors are welcome. The first Roman city in the Iberian Peninsula was Tarraco, and it would be a hard one for anybody to take by force. Built on rocks, it towers over 500 feet above sea level and is served by a natural harbor. It wasn't easy for the Romans to acquire it, and once they'd got the stronghold, they were determined never to let it go. They conquered Tarraco during the Second Punic War 2,200 years ago, and immediately set to work turning it into an impenetrable fortress. Almost a mile of 30-foot-high wall they built around the city is still standing today, along with 3 of the guard towers they built to keep watch over it. Unsurprisingly, Tarraco became Rome's base of operations in the area, and it was from here that the wars against the Lusitanians, Celtiberians, and Iberians were fought. The Tower of the Scipianes, a monument to Roman soldiers lost in wars, is still standing around 5 miles outside the city. These days, Tarraco is known as Tarragona. and the modern city surrounds all that came before it. Not all of the ancient cities prosper or survive long enough to become modern population centers. Some of them are conquered, abandoned, and then forgotten for centuries. As an example, here's Carnuntum. Once upon a time, Carnuntum was the single most important legionary camp anywhere on the frontier of the Upper Danube for the Romans, sitting just 20 miles away from Vienna in Austria. During the assault on the Marcomanni, the legendary Emperor Tiberius used Carnuntum as a base of operations. By the year 106, it was the capital city of Upper Pannonia, and was visited by Marcus Aurelius to finish off his book Meditations, the same one that he'd started in Aquincum. The campaign against the Marcomanni didn't go well, and much of Carnuntum was destroyed, only to be rebuilt once more. By the 3rd century, it was flourishing under the leadership of Septimius Severus. By the end of the 4th century, though, it had been invaded by Germans, and was surrendered to the Huns along with the whole of Pannonia in 433. Mysteriously, all record of Carnuntum disappears after that date. All we have to know it by are these ruins. Returning to the trend of major modern capital cities standing on the shoulders of what came before them, what is now Paris was once known as Lutetia to the Romans, although that was just one of its many names. The Greeks called it Leucotokia, and Ptolemy preferred Leucotikia. Perhaps Julius Caesar, who is believed to have come up with the name Lutetia, simply misheard it. The Romans captured Lutetia in the year 52 BC, before which it had belonged to the Parisi tribe of Gauls. Augustus took a personal interest in the development of Lutetia during the 1st century and ordered the erection of the Pilier des Notae, the oldest monument in all of Paris. Expansion continued into the 2nd century, with more houses and public baths, building the population to approximately 8,000 by 250. A barbarian attack in 275 made the south of the growing city unsafe, which sadly led to the abandonment and ruination of the old amphitheater. The name Paris gradually became preferred to Lutetia over the passage of time. Much of old Lutetia is now subterranean, but the theater, public baths, walls of the forum, and aqueduct are all still visible above ground. Porta Nigra in Trier is so well constructed and so well preserved that many people don't realize its true age. It looks like it was probably built 500 or 600 years ago, but it's actually 1,800 years old and represents the final lingering trace of the Roman Empire anywhere north of the Alps. We don't believe it was ever fully finished. The initial plan seems to have been for 2 further 4-story towers to be added to the structure, as well as an additional courtyard. For reasons history is yet to reveal, the additional building work was never completed. If it wasn't for the scavengers of the Middle Ages, Porta Nigra would look even better than it does. Many of the metal fasteners of the gate and other steel elements were taken and repurposed by the builders of that era. What is still within the walls somewhere, though, is the body of a Greek hermit monk named Simeon, who walled himself up in the eastern tower and is now interred somewhere within the building. We started with a volcanic eruption, and we're going to end with one too. Pompeii is world famous for being destroyed by a volcano. Pliny the Younger documented the event in his writings, and it was never forgotten. Akrotiri had no such luck. Although it suffered the same fate, it appears to have been forgotten for centuries and was eventually discovered by accident in 1967. From what we've discovered at the site, we know that Akrotiri, which is close to Santorini in Greece, was settled during the Bronze Age. Based on carvings and inscriptions found there, we're confident that the residents were Minoan. It looks like a prosperous town. The streets were paved, there was an advanced drainage system, and the standard of pottery was high. All of it was brought to a crashing halt by the eruption of Thera 2,200 years ago, which destroyed the town, but also preserved it under the ash. Curiously, unlike Pompeii, there's no sign of human bodies. Perhaps the residents saw the volcano coming and managed to escape. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!